Secret of the Mimic. This game was crazy. Okay, so it released 2 days ago. I know it's 2 or 3 days ago. It's been a very short time since it released, but we already know like 99% of the content of the game. Heavy spoiler alert for this video, but if you don't want spoiler, just leave right then and there. But if you've clicked on the video, you know what we're going to talk about. Today's video is about the Spronglock Suits that are featured in Secret of the Mimic. We're going to talk about how they work, we're going to analyze their mechanisms to figure out what makes them different from other Spronglock Suits we've seen so far, and we're going to make a little bit of theory about these suits, because I'm trying to get into FNAF theories as well. So yeah, as you can guess, when I've seen that there were Spronglock Suits in Secret of the Mimic, I went crazy. You know me. And if you don't, I'm Technopher, but you can call me Theo. And for the past 5 years, but technically 3 years, I've been trying to make Spronglock Suits a reality. You can see here my prototype. He's quite tall, so you don't see him fully in the picture. So yeah, I'm making Spronglock Suits, I'm making animatronics. If that makes you interested, please subscribe to my channel so that you can see this big boy finished eventually. And let's get right into it. First off, we're going to talk about when and where we encounter these Spronglock Suits, what characters they are, and the different emails that talk about these characters, so that we all are on the same page regarding the information about this suit. Then we are going to analyze the outer shells and the mechanisms of this suit. What are they seemingly made of? What Springlocks do we see being used? How do you wear them? How do they differentiate between the Spronglock Suits we've seen in other games and Secret of the Mimic? And finally, we're going to make theories, because the presence of these Spronglock Suits in the game could impact the FNAF lore in 100 different ways. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first Spronglock Suit we encounter in Secret of the Mimic is Captain Springlock. Before discussing where and when do we encounter those suits, I think it's important to get back into the context of the game. Secret of the Mimic happens in a location which we've never seen before, which is named Murray's Costume Manor, which I will call MCM throughout this video. Is an animatronic slash costume slash attraction factory, which is usually contracted by other businesses such as fredbear Entertainment, Chica's Party World, and other legal entities to create characters and costumes for their brands. One big example would be, of course, fredbear Entertainment commissioning Edwin to create these Spronglock Suits, but also Chica's Party World commissioning the MCM location to create designs and costumes for their main mascot, which is Chica. One of the main mechanics in the game that allows us to explore this brand new facility is called a data diver. Basically, the factory is divided in multiple different factions, which you can enter or not based on your rank. And your rank is contained on your data diver. Basically, there's the basic access, the admin access, the repair access, the the executive access. Based on what you are, you can access different parts of the facility. And one of these parts we have to access is called the theater. And the theater is quite an interesting part, because to access the backstage we have to wear a Spronglock suit. So we get into the Springlock preparation room, where there is a bust of an animatronic called the Captain Springlock. So the Captain Springlock seems to be a kind of sea dog themed animatronic with a long beard and a captain hat and the captain attire with a little golden shoulder pads. This section tells us to collect these different parts throughout the warehouse of the theater, while of course escaping the Mimic. And when we do find all of the different Springlock parts, we have to, and this will be important for later, activate the suit. We have to power the suit And that's when, for the first time in the game, and actually in any Five Nights at Freddy's game, we actually enter the Spronglock suit. What's also interesting is that in order to access the theater, we have to go in the suit and on a little platform that takes us to the theater. And then, that's actually a very fun part, but after a gameplay section where we have to put on the suit and put it off to solve puzzles, we end up mounting on these little platforms, which take us to the theater minigame, where there is a puppet show that plays, and at some point, we, the player, in the Spronglock suit, have to take part in the show. Like, we have to perform as Captain Springlock. This is just awesome. So that's the appearance of Captain Springlock. Throughout the Captain Springlock level, we can see on the walls poster that says that Springlocks are sensitive to water, and that, you know, water on a Spronglock suit is a no-no. You don't do that. We can also get emails where we have a bit of lore about this suit. Fiona, the new Springlocks are working well, even with the water damages. They should be ready for the diner soon. I'll just make sure to warn Hen about some of the more odd behaviors they might have.
Ed, I hate talking to you through this stupid bear, but it's hard to reach you otherwise. I'm worried about the new suit design. One of my costumers, Vic, nearly lost his hand today. All he did was spill a can of pop and the thing snapped shut like a bear trap. You're busy, but you can't rush these things. Please look into it.
The second time we see Spronglock Suits in the game, heavy spoiler alert once again, because this is in the ending. In the parachute ending, we access the R&D section of Manor's costume Manor, research and development. We find a prototype replica of a Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, which is the Help Wanted hub, you know, the FNAF 1 map, with prototype versions of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica and Foxy from FNAF 1. But that's not the only thing we see in that basement. We also see Springlocks of Bob, a dog, Monty, the gator, fredbear, and what seems to be Spring Bunny, but with no purple bow tie. We get a few voicemails from Edwin.
Aren't they insane? The look of these new animatronics is Fiona's design, and they're great. Oh, first they approve the art, then they approve the proofs. Now they change their minds when we're so close to final. Why would they change them now? Are they pulling my leg? The new concepts are frankly creepy. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm not changing a single bit of her work, and they can't make me. Test. Journal entry. I got the change order from Hen last night. None of this makes sense. I'm almost done. Why change it now? It would be so much easier to keep using the Springlocks. Just hire some teens to wear the suits like we always do.
Usually in Spronglock Suits, you have to take a hand crank to insert it into the back of the suit, and when you turn the hand crank, the mechanisms recoil the endoskeletons inside the sides of the suit. However, in Secret of the Mimic, as we see, we don't use a hand crank to power the suit, but instead we have to use a computer that turns on the suit, that powers on the suit, and then we have to pop a little button and the chest cavity opens, revealing the inside of the suit. The very first thing that we can notice when looking at these Spronglock suits is that unlike most of the designs that we've seen so far, they are much more bulky and segmented. Let's look for example at literally any other animatronic we've seen in the franchise. Each limb has only 2 segments. However, these animatronic Spronglock suits seem to be much more segmented. There's a shoulder pad, there's an arm that's in 2 segments and a forearm. and it's the same for the legs. Another thing that we can notice is that they are not covered in fur, they're covered in fiberglass. How do I know that it's fiberglass? Well, it's easy. When you look at Fredbear and Spring Bunny, the only Springlock prototypes that are not painted, you can see that the inside of them is very reminiscent of fiberglass shells, which means that these suits are made of metal lining and that is also covered with fiberglass shells. We can also see in the inside of the arms and legs that there is a foam padding so that it's more comfortable. And also we see through the mouth. This is something we see in FNAF 4 as Fredbear has a performer that sees through the mouth of the suit, which is completely different to Springchop, because Springchop sees through the eyes of the suit. Now onto the functionalities of the suit. These animatronic Springlock suits seem to be actuated, moved by pistons, and instead of these actuators being on an endoskeleton, like we see in any other FNAF animatronic, these Springlock suits seem to not feature an endoskeleton. Instead, the motors and pistons are on the joints themselves. You can see, for example, on the inside of the chest cavity, that there are 4 pistons that actuate the arm. And you can see on the hip the same thing, 4 pistons per limb that actuate the legs. In other suits, there's an endoskeleton that moves thanks to servo motors, and in there's no endoskeleton, it's empty. Instead of these suits being some sort of animatronic with an endoskeleton that, thanks to Springlocks, get retracted to the sides of the suit, that gets recoiled so that a person can wear it, well, instead it's a power armor. It's a full exoskeleton. But if it's the case, then why bother with the Springlocks? Well, I think that the Springlocks in these suits have a very distinct purpose. Well, the only example of an actual Springlock that we can see for the suits are the rib cages. Just like in the games and movie, these rib cages seem to open and close and seem to be the source of Springlock failures. These Springlocks really look like the ones that we see in Five Nights at Freddy's 3, being shaped like a more triangular shape. These Springlocks look more akin to the ones we see in the game. However, they are placed on the lower abdomen, which is unlike the games and more like the movie. So it seems to be a sort of mix between the movie Springlocks and the game Springlocks. I think that the Springlocks are made to hold the performer in place inside of the suit. Basically, they are a sort of harness that opens up to let you go inside of the suit and closes to make sure that you fit right and tight inside of the suit. One extra thing I have to mention is that in Murray's actual Manor, there is the legs of an actual Springlock endoskeleton from Five Nights at Freddy's 3, which means that this is not a retcon. These are not suits that replace the old ones in the lore. They are completely different suits. Okay, so what does that mean? I think I've got a picture of the timeline of events that led to their creations. First off, Henry Emily and William Afton create the original Spronglock suit. However, at some point, they plan on extending, making new locations aside from Fredbear's diner, or maybe upgrading the suit from the diner. So they ask Edwin to create Spronglock suits. They give him the blueprints and they say, look, these are the suits that we want, please make them. However, there's an accident with one of Fiona's clients who almost gets his hand cut. So Edwin logs in and he says, okay, I'm gonna make the suits safer. And he changed the entire design from the designs that we've seen in FNAF 3, for example. How do we know that? Well, we know that thanks to the blueprints. What am I talking about? In Secret of the Mimic, you can access the original blueprints for Captain Springlock, the Captain Springlock suit. And when we actually look at these blueprints, we notice that they are completely different from the final product. For example, it doesn't feature all of these aesthetic pirate elements. It's a naked suit. There's no hat, there's no beard, there's no captain outfit. And secondly, when you actually look inside of the blueprint, the Springlocks are completely different. You can even see what may be an endoskeleton, an original Springlock endoskeleton. And you can even see the design for the actual Springlock itself. So if the blueprints that Fazbear Entertainment gave to Edwin are different from the final product, I think that confirms our theory that originally he was meant to make Spronglock suits that were just like the ones we see in the original games. However, Edwin made them safer, so that's how I think it works. Edwin's safer Spronglock suit alternative is a power suit, an exoskeleton that thanks to pistons and motors can move by itself, but also can be worn by a person that just has to push a button on the actual animatronic to open the stomach latch. This sends a signal to the animatronic that then opens the Springlock rib cages. You enter the suit, the rib cage closes on you without killing you, of course, and this makes for the safest version of Spronglock suits that we have seen ever. Now, if they are this safe, why doesn't William Afton and Henry Emily use them for Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria and Fredbear's Family Diner? Because you may say this will prevent Afton from dying in the suit, and you would be right. However, we know thanks to Secret of the Mimic why these suits were never used in the diner. So now let's pivot to the theory part of the video. I have multiple theories on why these suits were never used and how they actually correlate to the actual FNAF lore. Theory number 1, why were these suits not used? Okay, so going back to this prototype Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria where the Spronglock suits are found. And once again, to the different and various cassettes that tell us the history of these suits. I think that something that's pretty obvious throughout Secret of the Mimic is that William Afton and Henry Emily want to make Edwin's work be as late as possible. Basically, they just want to mess with Edwin so that his work gets delayed again and again and he has to sell his company. Edwin is commissioned by Henry and William to make a cast for a new restaurant project. This restaurant project will be an extension of Fredbear's Family Diner, featuring Fredbear, Bonnie, Bob the dog, and Monty the gator. Edwin will make the suits, and he will be almost finished with them. Notice how throughout the entire establishment, only the Spronglock suits are functional. Henry calls him and says, "Hey pal, we're going to stop using Spronglock suits." Instead, they send him new design for new animatronics, which are Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. So outright, this tells us that Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria was originally meant to be a pizzeria filled with Fredbear, Bonnie, Bob, and Monty, which once again are also characters that we see in the storyteller ending, which are on the mural on the right of David's bedroom, which may mean that this lineup was actually the Murray family's idea, Edwin and Fiona's idea. And after that, Edwin would refuse to make the actual animatronics, but he's being forced to by Fazbear Entertainment. And just as he's making them, he's about to have them done, but Fazbear Entertainment comes in once again and says, "Okay, we have the proof of your animatronic designs, but please change them." They would send creepy new designs. This would once again send Edwin in a spiral of hate, and he would realize that Fazbear Entertainment is trying to mess him over. To me, that's the actual story of these Springlock suits. These were not made for the diner, but instead for the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria concept. Another theory I had is that, okay, hear me out, the original prototype Fredbear suit actually inspired Nightmare Fredbear. One of the things we notice when we take a look at these new Spronglock suits is that they've got a stomach hatch that can open and close. And I think that this stomach hatch is what inspired Nightmare Fredbear's design. Now, whether or not you believe that Mike or Crying Child is the FNAF 4 dreamer, it's evident that Fredbear's stomach mouth is inspired by something, a fear of being eaten. And if you want more proof, we can actually look at the stomach hatch itself and see that it has teeth. To close the mechanism, there are some sort of teeth that are on the stomach hatch itself, which allow once again the stomach to close. So to me, this reveals that the fredbear design, the Nightmare fredbear design, was somehow inspired by this suit. Now onto another theory. Glamrock Freddy is fredbear. So not really. But one other thing we can notice about this stomach hatch is that it's eerily similar to Glamrock Freddy's stomach hatch. We know that a lot of things from Murray's costume Manor were taken by Fazbear Entertainment and turned into the machines that we see in Security Breach. DJ Music Man is inspired by Big Top. Candy Cadet from FFPS is also coming from MCM. There's Chica, which is an MCM design. The Fast branch is inspired from the Data Diver, and on and on and on. And I think that one of these things is Glamrock Freddy. If you look at his stomach hatch mechanism, you can notice that it's the exact same as the one on Ruin Glamrock Freddy. And not only that, but in Ruin, Glamrock Freddy's foot clearly says prototype. And what other animatronic with a stomach hatch says prototype, Proto Fredbear. So I think that somehow Proto Fredbear has been repurposed and reused to make Glamrock Freddy. Now this was just small theories, and of course I think that these suits may have more implications in the lore, but so far I think we're pretty good. Thank you all for watching, and if you want to see more Springlock content, I plan on releasing an analysis of the Dead by Daylight Spronglock Suits, and maybe more stuff going down the road. Please subscribe, check out my Springlock project, and goodbye.